To me, one of the silliest things about people who say the U.S. government is in the planning stages or orchestrating a huge threat narrative attributed to UFOs is that the same people that make this argument will also usually assert that the U.S. government has alien reproduction vehicles. Now, why this is so silly to me is that if it's true that the U.S. government has alien reproduction vehicles, and I'm not convinced of that at all, I've heard the story with Mark McCandlish, but realize that's not even a first-hand story. That is very accurately hearsay. But let's, for the sake of this discussion, assume that the U.S. government indeed does have ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles. Well, it seems to reason that if the U.S. government was to orchestrate a huge alien threat narrative, beyond just saying it's a potential threat, they would have to reveal to the world how exactly they're going to go to war or defend this world from civilizations tens of thousands of years ahead of us. And to do that successfully, they would have to admit to having ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles. I hate to say it, folks, but I don't think the U.S. government would ever in a gazillion years want to admit to that, if indeed they have successfully back-engineered UFO technology, which I'm skeptical of, but I don't rule it out by any stretch. I think we could get disclosure that there is stuff out there not made by human beings. But I don't think the U.S. government would ever want to admit, even in a post-disclosure world, that they've successfully back-engineered this technology. I think that would be the last thing they would ever want to admit. And so, from my perspective, this clashes with a narrative that I've always found ridiculous, that the U.S. government is building up to this gigantic threat narrative. This argument fails on so many levels to me, and I don't want to go into all of that because it would be a long discussion. But just today at 7 a.m. this morning, an article dropped on the Hill written by U.S. Space Force Major Brian Goodman. The article is titled, "I'm in the Space Force, please stop asking me about UFOs." And here's a direct quote from that article. And I quote, "Ultimately, Space Force Guardians are not here to defeat alien invasions or extinction-level asteroids." If the U.S. government was in the planning stages or the implementation stages of creating an overwhelming alien threat narrative, I would have thought that they would have, given U.S. Space Force Major Brian Goodman a memo to emphasize the threat of UAP whenever he had an opportunity, but he did the absolute opposite. He's like, "Yo, we're the Space Force. We're not worried about an alien invasion. That's not what we do." Another example where the U.S. government had a perfect opportunity to drum up a threat but didn't is in the first UFO hearing we had that took place in, I think, April of 2022. During that hearing, Congressman Mike Gallagher of, I think, Wisconsin, very aggressively and coherently asked the Deputy Director of the Navy, Scott Bray, and the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, Ronald Moultrie. So Congressman Gallagher asked them both about the UFO incident that occurred at Malmstrom Air Force Base in the 60s, where allegedly a whole host of ICBMs were turned off. And you know what their response was? Their response was, "Oh, what?" I mean, I think Scott Bray was like, "Well, I've heard of it, but I don't really know anything about it." And Moultrie, I think, may have been even more, acted even more ignorant of it. And Scott Bray said that from what I recollect, there's nothing I've seen no official documentation on this. Now, if the U.S. government was actually building up a threat narrative attributed to UFOs, this would have been a perfect opportunity for them to have gone deep into, yes, they could have gone deep into saying, yes, there's a UFO nuke connection. And we are exceedingly concerned about it. And there's even been incidents where UFOs have turned on nukes. And we perceive this as a grave threat. They could have done that. They didn't do that. Which supports my contention that the U.S. government, the American intelligence agencies don't want to drum up a threat. Because if you drum up a UFO threat, now society is going to look at this topic through a microscope. What the U.S. American government agencies want is for us to ignore this enigma. That's their number one priority. And furthermore, if they were to drum up a threat, it would indict them even further. Because Congress would be like, wait a minute, so you've seen this as a threat and you've still withheld this from oversight? It would potentially make the cover-up even more illegal than it already is, and it would potentially facilitate a much more aggressive crusade to put some of these people behind jail who have engaged in illegalities associated with how they've handled this topic, okay? And by the way, I don't promote throwing people in jail. I promote amnesty, except for the most unethical of behaviors, such as killing people. I would not recommend amnesty for that, for obvious reasons. That's the gist of what I wanted to say, but I will add one more layer as to why I perceive the notion that the U.S. government is going to drum up this over-the-top threat narrative as ridiculous is because disclosure is not exclusively about the United States. Disclosure is about the vast amount of nations on this planet. Nobody gets to exclusively control the narrative in a post-disclosure world. So what does Russia have to say about this presence? What does China have to say? What does France have to say? What does Ghana have to say? What do the Philippines have to say about this presence? What does Mexico have to say? What does Indonesia and Saudi Arabia and Israel and Tibet and Lebanon and Iraq and so forth, what do their governments have to say about this presence? There is an inevitable conversation that emerges in a post-disclosure world. It could never be like this track that is promoted and therefore everyone falls in line. This topic is too big for that to ever occur. Too transcendent, too profound. Indeed, it is arguably the greatest story in the history of our species. No one, my friend, is controlling that narrative. So from my perspective, the U.S. government is not and has never been in the planning or implementation stages, or at least is not now, the planning and implementation stages of creating a huge threat narrative. They just want this to go away. And indeed, it doesn't go away if all of a sudden they start drumming up a huge threat narrative. And I would argue that the spiritual implications of the disclosure don't go away either. Because even if the U.S. government was to paint this presence in the most negative light imaginable, I still think there would be profound spiritual repercussions, if you will. The world would transform. I think the world will be vastly improved when we learn that we are not on the top of the food chain. We would inevitably become more skeptical of everything. We would inevitably become better critical thinkers. We would inevitably start entertaining ideas we never did before. that does not come under the umbrella of making humanity malleable, which may be something that the intelligence community prefers. That, my friend, comes under the umbrella of expanded consciousness. Yeah, I think we're good there. I think we'll wrap it up there. I got a lot more videos coming. This was just something that emerged on my mind, and I'm feeling good. So I'm like, let's make a video. There's a lot more to come, so please do not forget to subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my merch shop where I sell t-shirts. You could become a patron. You could become a YouTube member. You can give me a one-time donation. All these possibilities can be found in the description below, or you can just slap a like on this bad boy, and I will appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Special thanks to all patrons, YouTube members, those that have bought merch, those that have given me a one-time donation. I couldn't do without you. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.